Hej! Jag sitter här på FNs narkotikakommisjon i Wien mot slutet av uken. Jag har några vänner med mig från LIP, som är en politifaglig organisation och en syskonorganisation till en av våra medlemsorganisationer, LIP Scandinavia. Jag startar på norsk, men vi kommer av språkbarriärer hålla intervjuet på engelsk. Hi Diane, how are you?
Pleasure to meet you again, Farid, in person at the UN.
Likewise. Diane, would you like to start introducing yourself and follow up with a question? How do we fix a system that neglects the people that we are trying to help instead of empowering them?
Sure.
And do you have any, and please show us some suggestions to solutions as well.
Yeah, my name's Diane Goldstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. LEAP was founded in 2002 as a single policy organization where we had 5 police officers, 1 Canadian, 4 Americans, who believed that drug prohibition was one of the biggest policy failures, not just in the United States, but globally. And in fact, our founders really reflected that drug enforcement, drug control strategies was second only to slavery in America relative to the harms that we caused our society. And so I came into LEAP in 2010 once my brother, who was dual diagnosed and suffering from mental health illnesses, died from a polydrug overdose because he was criminalized after 20 years of being a person in recovery. And what I've seen through both my professional and my personal experience is that we continue from a societal perspective to try to achieve a drug-free world, which is completely unachievable. And we use law enforcement to criminalize ordinary people for public health issues like substance use disorder, poverty, homelessness, marginalized communities that have never had the economic resources to lift themselves up. And I blame politicians and heads of states who use law enforcement to try to stop a public health issue that we will never solve. So in America, one of the biggest issues for us is that we continue to think that the war on drugs is the solution to force people to stop using drugs rather than looking at a systems approach where law enforcement and police should be the last responder to public health issues. And until governments, whether it's, the UN as a state policy of countries, decides that we need to invest in the right systems. So from a decriminalization standpoint, because we believe that decriminalization of all drugs is a necessary step to get to the sensible regulation of all drugs, which will mitigate the violence. Now, I think I need to be really clear what this means. Is in America, we use decriminalization differently than people in the UK or in Western European countries do. In America, decriminalization is simply defelonization. People can still go to jail for possession of drugs. If they don't show up in court, if they've gotten a ticket, there's still many, many collateral consequences that ordinary day-to-day Americans suffer because of a conviction or being unable to pay an administrative fine that turns into a warrant. And so our belief is that...
That means that if you are poor,
exactly,
you are proportionately discriminated.
That is absolutely correct. If you're poor in America, you stay in jail where people that have resources can bail out of jail. If you're poor in America, if you get your driver's license taken away because you couldn't take care of your cannabis citation, we then impound your car and then you lose your job. It is this real vicious circle of using the criminal justice system to solve socioeconomic issues that we in law enforcement can never solve. And I will tell you, when I talk to ordinary cops in America, none of us want to be doing this work. No. We want to be out there catching real crooks. You know, law enforcement should be out there preventing harm. And there are people out there that are harming our communities and our constituents. But until we fix the socioeconomic issues, we have got to stop using law enforcement and the criminal justice system to just punish people to try to achieve a drug-free world that is completely unachievable.
Thank you very much, Diane. Neil, I want to go to you now. How does our Western repressive drug policies harm communities around the world? And what's the solutions?
Okay, so I'm a board member of LEAP, so I work with Diane and Nick, and I joined LEAP really because I wanted to continue fighting organised crime, because I'd dedicated my career to fighting organised crime, but I wanted to do it in a way that was effective, where we can actually have victories against organised crime. So what you've asked is a good question, and if you don't mind, I'll focus on the climate crisis.
Please do.
Because most people have not yet made the connection between drug prohibition and the climate crisis. In order to explain this, I'll have to sort of present this in economic terms. So we're all used to the police celebrating a big seizure of drugs. It's always the biggest seizure of cocaine since the last seizure until the next one. We see the police celebrate arresting a big gang or a big kingpin, but that's not evidence of success. That's just evidence of police activity. That's all. And what's important to note from the economic point of view is that the size of the market doesn't change in size at all as a result of that police activity. The value in the market stays the same. So demand is there, it will always be met, and the police have no impact on that at all. And there is no evidence to support the idea that they have an impact on it. Now, what's the reason that's important for the climate crisis is that organised crime control the fourth or fifth biggest business in the world. So if you take all of the drug markets together, it's the fourth or fifth biggest business in terms of financial value in the world. It's bigger than textiles.
Yeah, that's huge.
It's massive, which is an enormous amount of power. And that power is a corrupting power. Now, there are various documents which repeat the same kind of thing, but I'm going to quote a document from the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom called the Strategic Assessment into Organised Crime. And that document makes the very interesting observation that the money from the illicit drug markets is routinely reinvested into other forms of organised criminality. Or another way of saying that is that the value in the drug market makes the other forms of organised criminality possible. It makes it possible. So if you were to take legal control of the drug markets, you actually cripple organised crime twice. Because you take this huge business away from them and you cripple their ability to commit other crimes as well, to invest in other crimes. And the most important reinvestment that's happening around the world is in environmental damage. So money from the drug market is laundered routinely in deforestation, in illegal mining, in illegal fishing. But most importantly, the corruption that is paid for from the illicit drug market makes all of that environmental crime possible. Because once you've captured parts of a state, once you've captured your customs officials and your government officials or your police officers or all of them, because you've captured the whole government in a narco state, once you've done that, you can do whatever other crime you want. And so where our comrades in the environmental activist sector are protesting the legitimate investments of big oil and these huge companies, what they're missing is that the biggest and most powerful actors with the most financial power to corrupt are not the illicit economies, they're the illicit economy of drugs organised crime. So the only way that we can actually act on the climate crisis and achieve climate justice is to actually take that financial control away from organised crime. So now, I'm sorry, I'm quite used to being the voice of doom, because we're already worried about the climate crisis, and I'm sorry about this, but the message is grim. We really do need to end drug prohibition to save the planet. We can't sugarcoat this. It is that simple.
That's very interesting. The Norwegian government gives big grants to countries like Brazil for combating deforestation. How is there a connection between those types of policies and illicit drug cartel?
That's a very good point, because Norway is actually one of the 3 biggest countries which gives money specifically to protect the Amazon and other similar areas specifically. So there's Norway, the UK and Germany are the 3 biggest donors for that. I do not believe there is sufficient accountability of where that money goes, particularly from Norway, because we know that money from those countries goes towards militarization, to buy more weapons, to be at war with cartels.
Yeah.
So actually that money, not all of it, some of that money, we strongly believe in our movement, many people in our movement, that money is actually going to fuel the war on drugs, in the mistaken belief that is actually protecting the Amazon. But it's not. It's only creating more war. And that suits organised crime. War suits organised crime because it allows them to get rid of the opposition, it allows them to refine their activities, it allows them to be Look, drugs policing sharpens the sword of organised crime. It makes organised crime more ruthless, more effective, more corporate, and that's what's happened over the last few decades. And so we really should be analysing and looking very carefully at where that money's going. Is it being spent on peace? Or is it being spent on war? Because
on one of the side events I've been to during the convention, they actually also showed how the industries, legitimate industries like the energy giants and the mineral giants. You're from the UK as well. Could you share your thoughts on what the impacts are of extending stop and search powers, the police's stop and search powers, and how it harms communities?
Sure, yeah. My name's Nick Lynn. I'm a former UK police officer, and I've worked with LEAP for a few years. Yeah. And I've specialised in police use of stop and search powers, not just in the UK, but across Europe and elsewhere. The police have a lot of powers. And indeed, the war on drugs is one of the things that provides them with those powers. And I think it's true to say from the start, they don't need any more powers. They have enough already. They have too many. I want to focus on a specific kind of power, because I know that this is something that's being considered in Norway, which is suspicionless stop and search. And I think you're talking about having these zones where these powers will be able to be used. In the 1980s, there was trouble with football violence in the UK. And an act was brought in and a power was brought in called Section 60.
All right.
And different to the Norwegian idea, this is like a temporary geographical zone where the police don't need any grounds to search people. They can search whoever they want. And it was intended to combat football violence. But of course, when you give the police powers, they stretch it as far as they can. And the use of that power increased exponentially and was widely misused and abused. So much so that in some cities, police officers who were always given this power to use didn't know how to use the stop and search powers where you need to have grounds, because they never needed to. They could just use this power. Who gets targeted with those powers? Not people going to football matches, although that has happened, and I'll talk about that again in a moment maybe. But black people are disproportionately targeted by these stop and search powers. They're supposed to be used to combat violence, and yet the police use them to search for drugs. There's a very interesting study. So I like to sort of deal with the academic evidence on this. There's a 10-year study conducted by the Metropolitan Police themselves in London. And they looked at, the College of Policing in the UK looked at 10 years worth of data on use of this suspicionless stop and search power. And they found two things. The first finding was it basically had no impact on crime. It didn't make things hardly better. It didn't make things worse. It basically had no impact. But the second effect was the most notable and most serious one, is that what use of those powers does over time is drives a wedge between the people who get stopped and the police and authority. And of course, when it's Black and Asian people and people from less well-off backgrounds in particular parts of towns and cities where the power gets used, it drives a wedge between people. And the impact of that is not temporary. The impact of that is generational, because people remember those experiences for decades, and they share those experiences with their friends and with their family. If we want the police to be able to effectively do their work, there has to be trust and confidence between them and the community. And these powers, and the research shows us this is the case, will damage that, will wreck it if it even existed in the first place. So to sort of just mention the proposal in Norway to have these zones, don't do it, because it's going to make things worse. And it's not going to solve crime. And we know that, not just from the UK, we know this from other places in Europe, in the US, where you just ramp up the use of stop search powers. It makes things worse, not better.
That's very, very important message and touching, actually. And this is also what we've seen in Norway ourselves. Before our talk here, Nick, you shared a personal story with me on how you've been affected of these policies yourself. Do you care to share with our viewers?
Sure. Yeah. I've been stopped searched many times, but the specific power that I'm talking about, actually at a football match, myself and my daughter, who was a minor at the time, were searched by the police for weapons, even though the police officers doing the searching knew that I'm a chief inspector in the police and I'm not going to be carrying weapons. It was an unlawful search. And so on behalf of the people who don't have the ability to challenge these powers, we took legal action against the police and won the case. And I think the impact of being stopped and searched by the police, the humiliation, the embarrassment in front of all these people walking past think these people are bad. And this is happening every moment of the day, where the police misuse these powers. But I will talk about a success as well.
Yes, please.
So in my last role in policing, I was the stop and search lead at the College of Policing for England and Wales. And together with the Home Office, we wrote, we called it a scheme, a voluntary scheme for all police forces to regulate their use of stop and search. And one of the elements was around the suspicionless stop and search powers. And we got them to raise the authority level. So it couldn't just be authorized by any officer. We raised it to a senior officer.
Let me jump in, Nick, because you talk about such an important, valid point. In the United States, I'm working, you call them suspicionless stop, we call them pretextual stops. There are a significant number of academic studies that in the United States, separate from the College of Police in the UK, that reflect the exact same thing. And when we put in legislation to limit the stops, what we see is police actually then concentrate on real crime. And so rather than stopping, let's say, 100 people to try to get one gun, is they're stopping people based on real suspicion, and they're actually taking more weapons off the street, solving more crime, and upholding police legitimacy and trust. There was this one very interesting body-worn camera study that was done that I read, that one stop, you could have 100-man police department. 99 officers are doing absolutely the perfect right thing. If you have one police officer that violates someone's constitutional rights, that impacts the whole entire police department. And I think this is something that law enforcement doesn't understand is from the drug prohibition standpoint, what it created was the over-policing of marginalized communities in our society. Whether it's the UK, whether it's Norway, it's all the same. And if we want people to trust us, to come to us, for cops to actually be the helpers, that we all got into this job for the right reason, this doesn't do it. It makes things just so much more worse. And it's a systemic issue. Myself as a police officer, I don't have to be racist to participate in a systemically racist system that's set up to marginalize people in this fashion. And then you have all the other issues of police corruption based on drug prohibition and drug cartels. We know what the solution is. We've known what the solution has been going back to when Chief August Vollmer in the 1920s, who was the man who professionalized law enforcement in the United States, said that cops should never be involved in the prosecution or the enforcement of any moralistic law. And he specifically named gambling, alcohol, sex work, and drugs. And all of us have experience where we've seen law enforcement, we've seen people we've served with that have been corrupted in the enforcement of those four areas. And so what do? The solution is we end drug prohibition.
Very interesting, and thank you for that input. And it also shows that it takes a long time to build a bridge, but it's extremely easy to destroy it. Neil, sorry, would you have? Do you have some final remarks before we round this up?
Yeah, briefly. Yeah, all excellent points. I think it's worth pointing out that there is a direct correlation between the levels of crime in communities and the levels of policing. And what I mean by that is that where there are more repressive laws, more repressive policing, and it's ramped up, you see the reaction. And I think one of the best examples of that, of a direct correlation, is Sweden, your neighbour.
Yeah.
Because Sweden have ramped up their drug laws, and they've had more drug laws, and they've made it tougher and tougher. And I remember speaking to one police officer when I was there in Umeå, who said, "Yeah, we arrest twice as many people for drugs as any other country in Europe," and he said it proudly. And it's only Sweden that's got a problem with hundreds of explosions going on, with battles between organised crime. And for a country with only 10 million people, that's extraordinary. But Norway is in a unique position to pay attention to this, because since 2017, Norway has gone in a slightly different direction, or begun to go in a slightly different direction, and pay attention to the fact that drugs are a health issue rather than a moralistic issue. That, I mean, obviously, Norway could go much further, but that point in history is important, because there are various data points which show that Norway is doing substantially better than Sweden in the direction that Norway took. And we know, even since June 2023, that the last new drug laws that Sweden brought in, they've just made it tougher and tougher, and they've had more and more violence. And of course, there's a huge political threat as well, because in Sweden, it allows extremist politicians to blame the violence on immigration or people of colour, because that's what they're doing. And it's not. It's the systemic law, it's prohibition that's done that.
Thank you, Diane, Neil, Nick. Very inspiring, very knowledgeable. And I think a lot of people in Norway appreciate your inputs. And it's especially motivating to hear people who have background from law enforcement having an evidence-based approach to this whole field that we call narcotics, and how we can find policies that help rather than harm people. And I think number one is, if we want to help people, we have to start by helping them and not by punishing them.
Absolutely.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.